Well, anyway, last week we were looking at 4 young Hebrew boys who were captured and taken long way away from their home. They were ripped away from their parents. They were taken to a heathen land that did not serve God, did not believe in God, and they were going to be trained in the ways of the Babylonians and the Chaldeans, and they were going to have to learn their ways and their language and even their religion, and they changed their names. They gave them names that pertained with the heathen gods that the Babylonians worshipped. But they still would not give in, they still would not compromise, and they refused to eat the king's meat and drink the king's wine. And as a result of that, God gave them wisdom and power and strength above everybody else that was being tried and tested at that time. But now it's not over with, and I want you all to understand that everybody as a Christian is going to have a trial by fire. Not one, but many of them to make you stronger and stronger. And if God doesn't let you go through a trial by fire to strengthen your faith, you never had it to start with. You never got in to start with. The devil doesn't go after his own. Please understand that. He doesn't bother his own. He wants you to be lulled to sleep and be just as ignorant as possible because he wants you to join him in hell where he's going. And so if he starts attacking you, consider that an honor. Consider that an honor. Here in verse 1, we're going to see it all getting started again because King Nebuchadnezzar was a king baby. He wanted everything his way, and he'd throw a tantrum and a fit if he didn't get his way, and he'd kill everybody that disagreed with him. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. That thing was about 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. An image of gold. That's amazing. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon where he was ruling. Now you got to remember, this man is like the boss of the known world over in that area now. What he says goes. And he is so egotistical and so much in love with himself that he probably planned to die in his own arms. Rest of y'all will get that later. And so he puts this big image of gold up in this really big plain where everybody can see it. And then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now you got to remember, there was no internet back then. Okay? There was no newspaper back then because the rocks were real hard to put in the boxes, you know? And so the only way they could get the word out was they had the representatives from all the provinces come. They would brief them, then they would go back to their provinces and they would tell you what the king said. Then the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together into the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that he had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up." All of these instruments, it sounds like they're playing bluegrass or something. I'm not real sure. Some of those are very ancient instruments. And so the moment you hear this music, no matter where you are, you better bow down and you better worship that golden image. That's not hard to get the world to do that. It's not hard. The world worships everything but God. They find human idols and they worship institutions and they worship things. And it's not hard to get them to do that. And then he makes this statement right here. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And so therefore at that time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the nations and all the people and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. That's no big deal. The world goes along with just about anything. If you don't believe that, go to Yahoo and find out what's trending. They have the most ridiculous things that people are looking up, and people have this desire to worship something. Everybody does. But they're worshiping the wrong thing. They're worshiping the things that will bring them down, that cannot help them in their time of crisis. And so it's not hard to get these people to follow. And of course the incentive of you're going to be thrown in a burning fiery furnace in the very same hour, that makes it even easier. And so there were a group of people that were jealous of these Hebrew children because they didn't go along with the flow. They weren't just good little sheep and good little drones or whatever you want to call them. They made a stand at the beginning for God, and they're still doing it. And so the Chaldeans were very jealous, and so at that time certain of the Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. And they spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." That's always the good buttering up phrase, you know. "O king, live forever." They know how to play him. Any of y'all's kids ever learned how to play y'all? No, never. No, I never had that problem either. Dude. They know just the things to say to get your attention. It works more with daddies than it does with mamas. But mama can be had as well, okay? But they know how to sucker up to you. And they came up to the king, "O king, live forever." And then they said, "Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image." They're reminding him of a law that he just passed. "And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Now I want y'all to understand, the legal system in Babylon was not like what we have here. There are no lawyers. I saw a commercial the other day, and I could say that since we don't have none in here, that God created snakes first because he needed to practice before he created lawyers. There were no lawyers. There were no reprieves. And you couldn't get a shrink to say you didn't know what you were doing and get you off from that. There was no time for these boys. These are teenage boys now. And they're told, if you don't do what the king said, we're going to throw you in a fire in the same hour. There was no time for them to strategize. There was no time for them to think about what they were going to do and how they would have a plan B. And obviously they didn't talk among themselves and say, you know, we're hundreds of miles from home. Mom and Daddy is not here. The priest from the synagogue or the temple, he's not here. Nobody else is here to see. What harm would it be to just go along with it, you know? And a lot of times we as Christians, we are tempted to be part of the status quo and go along with what everybody else is to get along, but it don't work that way. And so they made that statement to the king, and then they're telling on him. There are certain Jews who you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their real names was Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These are their new names given to them by the eunuch, and it had something to do with the Babylonian gods. And it said, these men, O king, have not regarded you. They don't serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden image which you have set up. People will accuse you. They will tell lies on you. And they will try to set you up to make you fall. You will find out real quick who your friends are when you give Christ your life. Real fast. All the buddies that come around for the dope or the booze or the good times, they will leave you real quick. Because they weren't your buddy to start with. They were your leeches, okay? That's true. And when people see that you proclaim the name of Christ, they'll go, oh yeah, I'm going to set him up to fall. I'm going to fix him. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I can rile him up enough to get where he'll say this or where he'll do that. And then we can go, oh yeah, you said you were a Christian. You'll hear that a lot. But they had no clue, these accusers, they had no clue who these boys belong to, and the people that do that to you have no clue who you belong to either. They don't get it. And so here is King Baby. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they brought these men before the king. They're really boys. He had them brought in. Bring them to me. You ever seen them movies where the king, bring them to me, off with their head, all that time? Well, that's the way Nebuchadnezzar was, and he'd have you killed just like that. Nebuchadnezzar couldn't believe that anybody would dare disobey him. That's how egotistical he was. Much less a bunch of teenage boys that are hundreds of miles from home and nobody's looking. He just couldn't believe it. And so Nebuchadnezzar spoke unto these boys when they came in, and he said, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not you serve my gods nor worship the golden image which I have set up? So to save face here, he's going to repeat the law to them. Now, if you be ready, at what time you hear the sounds of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, that's great. And listen to this arrogant devil right here. And you'll hear it too. You'll hear people say this. But if you worship not, you shall be cast in the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And listen to this arrogant man. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Oh, he's getting ready to find out. He's getting ready to find out. This is the question you will hear to the day you leave this earth. Who is that God that can do such and such for you? And you tell him like old John Starnes did, he's the God that cannot fail. He's the God that cannot fail. That's who they are. That's who can deliver. I have been serving the Lord since June of 1969, and I have failed him, but he, buddy, has never, ever failed me. Never. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said, now you wouldn't think this coming out of a teenage boy's mouth. They said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer you in this matter. In other words, we're not afraid of you. We're not worried to answer you in this manner. Folks, you don't have to be afraid. If you are serving God, if you belong to him, you don't have to be afraid. You don't even have to think twice. You tell them who you serve and let God defend himself. We always so worried that if we don't say the right things, God can't be defended. Don't have to worry about it. God defends himself. Let not your heart be troubled. He told that to his disciples. He tells that to us. Don't worry. Let God worry about those details. You just don't fear. They made this statement. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. God is able and God can do as He chooses. Like He said, don't get past God. There's no surprises with Him. He has everything planned. He has everything under control. And when some kind of a thing pops up that really scares us, we wonder, well, where's God at? Is he watching? Let me tell you something. God had all of these things orchestrated before you were born. And what He's doing is He's letting you into the mix so you can grow and get strengthened by these things and these events that are coming along in your life. And He leaves examples all through the Bible, and He'll walk with you through the things. I've had a whole lot of tough things happen to me since I've gotten saved. Really, really tough things. And it won't that God was trying to hurt me. God was trying to help me and make me strong, because there's other people in here that are getting ready to go through the same things that I went through, and I need to have some knowledge on how to comfort you and help you and pray for you. And that's true with every one of y'all in here. That's how that works. This world is cursed, it's wicked, it fell thousands of years ago. And one day Jesus will set it all straight. But until then, we've got to endure the fires that He puts us through to make us stronger so we can help other people that's going through their fires. This world is no friend of Jesus's, and none of you either. Please understand that. But they said this: "But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up." They told the king, even if God chooses not to deliver us from this. And sometimes He doesn't. Sometimes He takes you home. Sometimes you're just burned out and He takes you home and gives you a new body. Sometimes that's what God does. And they said, no matter what, be it known that we will not serve that and worship that golden image, and we won't serve your gods. A lot of times God does bring us home to be in His presence. One of the greatest examples of that in the Bible was Stephen. Stephen was the first deacon that we have on record, and he got stoned to death for preaching. No, you're not supposed to stone deacons to death for preaching. They can preach, it's all right. And Stephen was telling it like it was, man. He didn't hold nothing back, and the crowd went buck wild at him. They were so angry, and they start throwing stones at him to kill him. And you know what he said? First of all, he forgave them, told the Lord not to hold it against them, and then he said, I see heaven open and Jesus standing at the right hand of God the Father. His natural position in the Bible is seated at the right hand. Jesus stood up for him. When he came home, he stood up for him. And let me say this, you serve him faithfully. You might leave this world before he comes back to get you, but he'll stand for you. That was the deal. And so Nebuchadnezzar, after he heard that, it said, then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and I love the Old English, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That meant the color went out of his face. He was so mad. The color went out of his face. You ever seen anybody do that? Get so mad? And said, therefore he spoke and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. That's fine because that's God's perfect number. Number 7. Heated up 7 times more. Now, I read some stuff in archaeology about this. And what he had was like a box, a pretty good size, and it had an entrance at the top where they would throw people down from the top. And he had a window that he sat down and he sat in a chair and watched people burn in that furnace. That was what he thought was a thrill. And so understand this, when you make your stand, Satan rages. He does. But please remember, the Bible says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Let him holler. Let him rage. Let him do all he wants, because he is limited in what he can do. And the king commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. When you make your stand as a Christian, Satan does step up the game. He does. He knows that he is already lost. The devil is not a fool concerning the scriptures. He can quote them as good as you can. He knows what the end game is, but he's hoping that you don't. The greatest tool that Satan has is ignorance. And he don't want you to understand what's in here and the promises that are in here. And he don't want you to believe any of this because he wants you to join him one day where he's going. And so it said these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, whatever that is, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Why did he put all that stuff on them? Why did he put all of these clothes? Because he wanted them to burn even more. He wanted to give some fuel for the fire. He wanted some genuine demonic entertainment. And therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire killed those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these, I love this. Man, if this don't give you Holy Ghost goosebumps, you're something wrong with you this morning. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound. They were tied up now into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Whew. Then Nebuchadnezzar, I bet he got up out of that chair. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonished. And he rose up in haste, and he spoke, and he said to his counselors, there was all this gang of his entourage hanging around with him, and he looked in that furnace and said he rose up in haste. He jumped up out of his seat, and he said to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound, tied up into the midst of the fire? And they answered and said, true, O king. Oh, Lord, help me get through this one. And he answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. The King James capitalizes that. I like that, because there were times in the Old Testament when Jesus himself appeared and handled things. Right. And I believe with all my heart he did here too. I can hear him now standing up there looking in there, and the counselors would go, well, what does he look like? What does he look like? And no doubt old Nebuchadnezzar would go, he's always hid, and his hair's white like wool. His eyes is a flame of fire. His feet are like brass, and his voice as the sound of many waters. I can hear it now. Whew. Remember, they're loose. The only thing that got damaged was the ropes that they tied them up with. They burned right off of them, but nothing else. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke. And I love the way they changed their tune. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God. Oh yeah, even the heathens have to acknowledge that. He said, come forth and come here. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth out of the midst of the fire. What happened to the 4th one? Didn't but 3 come out, but he saw 4 in there walking around. Whew. It's because he's still there. He is still there waiting to walk with you when you go through your fiery trial. Right. You will never be alone. If you belong to Jesus, I don't care how bad it gets, He will walk with you. He says in the book of Revelations, fear not, I am the first and the last. I am He that liveth and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys to hell and death. You don't ever need to be afraid. He's waiting in that furnace for you, because everybody that knows Jesus is going to walk through it at one time or another in their life. And He's there. And the princes, the governors, the captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed. I want to tell you that that's the biggest miracle of all, that not a hair of their head got singed. I told y'all the awful story, since we're confessing our past. Back many years ago, I was working in a laboratory. Everybody had gone to lunch, and I wanted a cigarette. I stuck that thing in my mouth and looked. I couldn't find a lighter anywhere in the office, in the lab. So there was a burner right there, and I hit the spark on it, and the flames come up like that. I had much longer hair than this, and I leaned down to light that bad boy, and I set my hair on fire, burned it right up. And after I finished the cigarette, then I went to see what was the damage done. Let me tell you, it don't take but a spark to burn your hair up. A little spark and it goes up, poof. And not a hair of these boys' heads were even singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of it had passed on them. Man, you can come in from outside burning leaves and you smell like burning leaves. Your clothes. I had a barbecue at my house for the church back years ago, and we had this great big 275-gallon oil drum turned into a grill, and they brought me 100 pounds of chicken, and I cooked it over charcoal. And like I was telling Mike Duff the other day, for 3 days I smelled like smoked chicken. I took showers, I washed my clothes, and I had to stay about 10 feet away from her at night because I was afraid she'd wake me up with a fork in her hand. That not even the smell of the fire had passed on them. Let me say this, buddy, you walk with Jesus, when you come out of this world, you won't even have the stink of it on you.